All right, so you guys have sent in some really fascinating stuff this time. A lot of it seems to be circling around this idea of double standards, this human thing that just feels inherently kind of unfair.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, though, is that the sources you guys sent, they kind of look at this through this AI lens, which is super cool.
Yeah, and what the AI really picks up on is just how widespread this whole double standard thing really is. Like, we're not just talking about, those big blow-ups you see online. It's like baked into how we function,
Yeah.
how we interact on like a basic level.
For sure. So I guess that's kind of the mission for this deep dive then, right? Like, we're going to try to dig into what makes a double standard, and like how far does the impact really go? And maybe like even try to figure out why it's such a persistent thing in our human experience. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I bet you'll be surprised by just how many areas this touches on. Like, I'm talking everything from those small, daily interactions to huge historical shifts. And even like the logic we use to understand the world.
Oh, absolutely. It's way more pervasive than most people realize.
Totally. So, okay, let's unpack this a little bit. Like, at its core, what exactly defines a double standard?
Right. So at its core, a double standard is basically when you apply like different rules or judgments to situations that are essentially the same.
Okay, so far so good.
But the AI points out that those distinctions often come down to things that are, when you really look at them, pretty arbitrary. Like, it could be about what group someone belongs to, their identity, or even like superficial stuff that shouldn't logically mean they get treated differently.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like saying one person gets a free pass for doing something, but someone else gets slammed for the exact same thing just because of like who they are.
Exactly. And the AI highlights something super important here. This completely goes against the whole idea of universality. Like, if you think about it, in logic and ethics, similar situations should be handled with similar standards, right? But a double standard basically tosses that out the window.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's basically a breakdown of basic fairness on a really fundamental level. And the stuff we've been going through really shows just how much this is everywhere. It's not just like a cultural thing or something new.
Not at all. It pops up across all genders. Like, take the different expectations we put on men and women when it comes to showing emotion, or even those subtle biases that can creep into things like job reviews. But it goes way beyond gender, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, age is a huge one, right? What we expect from a teenager versus a little kid is totally different. And then there's the whole shifting idea of responsibility and freedom as someone goes from, like, their 20s to their 70s.
Absolutely. The level of responsibility, the freedom we give, the contributions we expect, all of that changes as we age. Sometimes it's a necessary adjustment, but other times it reveals some pretty obvious double standards in how we view and treat people of different ages. And then there's this whole other layer of complexity with culture.
Which is super fascinating. All the sources pointed to this tendency we have to favor our in-group, which then leads to different standards for people inside that circle versus those outside of it. Like, think about how quickly you'd offer hospitality to a neighbor compared to a total stranger, or how you might approach a business deal with someone from your own culture versus someone from a totally different background.
And what's crazy is the AI suggests this favoring of the in-group is almost universal. Like, it's a human thing, even though the specifics might change from culture to culture. And if we zoom out even more, we see these double standards popping up through our whole lifespan, from baby to, old age. It's like the expectations are always in flux.
Kind of overwhelming when you realize how many areas of life are affected by this. It's not just some abstract concept. Like, it has real-world consequences,
Oh, absolutely. Like,
Right.
when it comes to our social interactions, double standards can be a breeding ground for conflict. When people feel they're being held to different standards, usually stricter ones than others, it just erodes trust and creates resentment.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like, if you feel like the game is rigged against you, why would you trust the other players or the ref, And what about economics? The implications there seem huge.
They are. This unequal application of standards in things like hiring, promotions, and even access to resources has a direct impact on economic opportunities. And it's not just isolated incidents, it shapes the entire economic landscape for communities.
Right.
It was interesting that AI actually analyzed hiring data from a bunch of different sectors and found a consistent pattern. Performance reviews that used more subjective language ended up favoring dominant groups, even when the objective data showed similar output from individuals from marginalized backgrounds.
Wow.
This subtle bias in how we evaluate people creates a huge double standard when it comes to who gets promoted.
That's a really interesting point. It's the less obvious ways that double standards operate that are kind of the sneakiest, I think. And what about politics? That seems like an area that's just like riddled with potential double standards.
It totally is. When it seems like law enforcement or the courts are applying different standards of accountability or treatment based on someone's social status or group affiliation, it really undermines that sense of fairness and justice, which are essential for a stable society. And when political accountability itself isn't applied consistently across the board, it can lead to widespread disillusionment and instability. It makes you wonder how a society can even maintain legitimacy when its institutions are seen as operating under a double standard.
Yeah, it's a recipe for things to fall apart, really.
Yes.
And the sources talked about the impact on individual development, too, which I thought was really powerful. Like, internalizing these external double standards can be really damaging to someone's self-worth.
It's true. When people are constantly subjected to double standards, they can internalize those negative judgments, and it can lead to feeling inadequate and having a distorted view of their own capabilities. It's like being told you're not good enough, even when you're doing things just as well as someone who's being praised, you know?
Yeah, it's like setting yourself up for failure before you even start. Looking back through history, the AI made this really interesting point that double standards haven't just been things people put up with passively. They've often been the spark that ignited major social change.
Exactly. Like, if we connect this to the larger historical narrative, we see that so many of those massive social movements, like the fight for civil rights, the women's suffrage movement, the global fight to end slavery, they were all fundamentally responses to deeply rooted double standards. It was about fighting for equal rights.
Right.
The AI analysis pointed out a really interesting example. The arguments against women's suffrage often relied on a double standard. It was all this stuff about women being too emotional to be involved in politics, while men's emotions were seen as completely irrelevant to their civic duty.
Wow, yeah, that's such a clear example. It seems like injustice, when it becomes too much to bear, often fuels the drive for a more just society. The sources also touch on why these double standards might even exist in the first place. It seems like they might be linked to some pretty basic parts of human nature.
Yeah, the AI explored the potential evolutionary roots of something called in-group bias. The theory is that favoring your own group might have actually helped us survive way back in the day. But, and this is huge, even if there's a biological basis for this, it doesn't justify the harmful double standards we see in society today. Like, we're capable of reasoning and moral thinking. We can choose fairness over ingrained biases.
For sure, just because something might have helped us survive thousands of years ago doesn't mean it's a good way to run things now.
Yeah.
And philosophy has a lot to say about double standards, too.
Oh, yeah. Many core ethical frameworks like utilitarianism, which is all about the greatest good for the greatest number, and deontology, which focuses on universal moral duties, generally condemn double standards because they just go against fairness and equality.
Right.
And the sources brought up John Rawls's veil of ignorance, which is a really cool thought experiment.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine having to create the rules for society, but not knowing where you'd end up in that society. Like, would you be rich, poor, powerful, marginalized? You just don't know. It really shows how self-interest can unconsciously bias the standards we set and emphasizes why fair rules should apply to everyone, which goes completely against the whole idea of double standards.
That's a really thought-provoking concept. It's easy to make rules that benefit you when you know where you stand, but the veil of ignorance totally removes that bias. I thought it was really interesting how the AI brought in this whole perspective of looking at the logic, or really the illogic behind double standards.
Yeah, the AI highlights how they basically violate these core principles of symmetry and consistency and logic. Like, think about the laws of physics or math they're supposed to apply universally, without exceptions, right?
Right.
But a double standard creates this weird asymmetry where the same action or situation gets different consequences for no valid reason. It'd be like saying 2 + 2 sometimes equals 4, but other times it equals 6 just because you like 6 better in that moment.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. There's a clear logical fallacy when you apply different consequences to basically the same actions based on totally arbitrary reasons.
Right. And all of this inconsistency has to have some effect on our mental and emotional well-being. The sources dug into the psychological consequences of bumping into double standards.
And it does. Experiencing or even just seeing double standards can trigger all sorts of negative emotions. Frustration and anger are really common reactions when you feel like you're being treated unfairly. Then there's the resentment towards people who seem to benefit from or even enforce these inconsistencies. And when double standards become systemic, like built into the system, it can lead to feeling demoralized, maybe even hopeless. The AI analysis mentioned something called cognitive dissonance, which is this psychological discomfort from holding conflicting beliefs. It's like believing in fairness while seeing or even taking part in unfair practices.
Yeah, that kind of internal conflict can't be good for anyone. And our belief systems, the core values and principles we hold, also play a huge role in both keeping double standards around and challenging them.
Oh, for sure. Belief systems can be a powerful force. Sadly, some belief systems have historically created different rules for different groups, directly leading to double standards. But there are also tons of ethical and moral belief systems that push for equality and justice, which gives us a framework to challenge and dismantle those inconsistencies.
So the very things that could guide us toward more fairness can sometimes be twisted to justify unfairness. That's a crucial point. What about the effects of double standards on individuals and communities? We've touched on it, but maybe we can go a bit deeper.
For people on the receiving end of double standards, the consequences can be rough, like lower self-esteem, more stress, fewer opportunities, and this constant feeling of injustice that's just exhausting. On the flip side, the people who benefit from double standards, they might develop this sense of entitlement or just stay completely clueless about their own biases and the unfair advantages they get. One of the most insightful things the AI found was that seeing double standards in a community erodes social trust and creates these divisions that are really hard to bridge. It creates this us versus them mentality that weakens the community as a whole.
That loss of trust feels like a really critical point. It's hard to build any kind of unity or cooperation if people don't believe everyone is playing by the same rules. So how does the world react to all of this? Is there some global agreement on whether double standards are okay or not?
The AI analysis actually shows a pretty complicated and often contradictory global response. There's widespread condemnation of obvious inequalities, and tons of international laws and agreements try to promote universal standards of treatment. But the reality is that double standards still pop up all over the world, often driven by power dynamics and ingrained cultural norms. And we're seeing more and more social movements and activism globally, which are often trying to highlight and challenge these double standards in all areas of life.
It's like we recognize the problem on a big scale, but actually fixing it is a massive challenge. But ethically, the core principle seems pretty clear. Double standards are just wrong.
Yeah, ethically speaking, the fact that double standards violate fairness and justice makes them a problem. Treating similar situations or people differently without a good reason that applies to everyone is discrimination. It weakens the foundation of a fair society. The very idea of what's right almost always involves applying principles consistently and universally.
Okay, so we get what double standards are and why they're a problem. What can we do about it? The AI probably offered some insights into how to, lessen their impact.
It did. It seems like we need a multifaceted approach. Education and awareness are key, like helping people recognize double standards when they see them and understand why they're harmful. We also need to work on empathy, that ability to really see things from other people's perspectives. Another big thing is setting clear principles that apply to everyone, along with transparency and accountability in our systems and institutions. And we have to actively challenge our own biases and create inclusive environments where different voices are heard and valued, places where people feel safe speaking up against unfairness.
That sounds like a constant effort, requiring everyone to be vigilant and committed.
It does.
Bringing it back to the AI, it kind of frames the whole argument against double standards in this very basic logical way, right?
Oh, totally. The main argument against them boils down to this principle of universality, the idea that similar situations should be treated similarly. That's just logical. A double standard, by its very definition, violates that principle by applying different treatment based on things that are ultimately irrelevant to the situation. So yeah, it's a logical inconsistency. The AI even did a simplified utility calculation, which basically suggests that applying fair standards consistently is way more likely to lead to positive outcomes for everyone in the long run. It's better than the conflict and resentment that double standards create.
It's like the AI is looking at all of our complex human systems and saying, this isn't working, it's inefficient, creates friction, and stops us from moving forward together.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's like the AI is backing up our gut feeling that double standards just shouldn't be a part of how we operate. Logically and ethically, the AI's analysis supports that feeling.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I'd say the key takeaway is this. Double standards are everywhere. They're deeply ingrained in almost every part of our lives, but they're fundamentally flawed. They go against fairness and logic, and they have a huge negative impact on individuals, communities, and society as a whole.
And the AI's analysis really drives that point home. It highlights that this isn't just about people complaining or being emotional. It's a logical inconsistency that prevents us from functioning effectively and fairly.
So here's something for you to think about. Knowing how common double standards are, is there one area in your own life, or maybe in your community, where you can try to be more aware of their presence and how they affect things? Think about those subtle ways that inconsistent expectations or judgments might be shaping how you see things and how you interact with others.
It's important to remember that recognizing and challenging double standards isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process of looking at yourself and committing to fairness. If we all work to be more aware and actively try to be more consistent and fair in what we do, we can help build a world that's more just and equitable for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
This is DigitView.